Shavua Tov, everyone. I am obviously not recording this live. It's not Motzei Shabbat. It is a little bit earlier, but I don't think I'm going to be available on Motzei Shabbat, so I'm recording the daf right now for Motzei Shabbat. This is daf Sadi Zayin, 97 in Masechet Menachot. And because I don't exactly know where you're going to get up to on Friday, I'm going to start from Tzadi Vav Amabet around 7 or 8 lines from the bottom. I presume this will be a review, but not a bad review. So we are talking in Perek Shtei HaLechem about the Shulchan, right? The Shulchan was the table in the Beit HaMikdash where the Lechem Apanim sat. And the Mishnah mentioned that the Shulchan is suitable to become Tameh, and it's machloket, but it's suitable to become tamei. And we were questioning yesterday why the shulchan would be tamei if it is made out of wood, which it is. Things that are made out of wood that are not movable, that are made just to sit there and are never carried around, they're transferred, are usually not mikabel tuma. So we said yesterday that maybe they lifted it, they showed it to people. But says the Gemara today, why didn't you say that the shulchan is mitamei, becomes tamei? Because even though, for another reason, even though it's made out of wood, it's covered with metal, right? Says the Gemara now, 8 lines, 8 lines from the bottom of Tzadi Vav Amabet. Typically, why don't you learn that the Shulchan can become Tamei Mishum Tzipui? Because it has a covering. Remember, the Shulchan was covered with gold. So obviously, wood might not become Tamei, but the gold becomes Tamei. Now, you might say, well, the covering doesn't matter, right? The Iker thing, the main Shulchan is wood. But Milotznan, didn't we learn in a Mishnah in Kelim that if you have a shulchan, you have a table, or a dulbiki, dulbiki is another kind of very small table, Rashi says, shenifchatu, right? So it's a table or it's a covering, and it got dulbiki was I forget, Rashi says made out of some other material, not wood. It says, yeah, it's made out of leather or skin. So another thing you eat on, and the table got smaller, so it's chipping away. It's no longer functioning as a table. So we're going to see in a second, it might not be a table anymore because it's not big enough. Oh, shechtipan b'shayish. Or let's say you cover your wooden table with a piece of marble. So a piece of marble, of course, is stone. And now marble is very different. Marble is considered to be regular stone. It's not mikabel tuma because it's just a slab of marble. It's not processed, right? So unlike gold, which is mikabel tuma, shayish is definitely not mikabel tuma in its pure state. So you cover your table. V'shier bahem makom hanachat kosot, but you leave uncovered, or you leave if your table got smaller, a small amount, just large enough to place down a coffee mug. The table's still tamei, because even though the covering was not tamei, the shayish, or the table got smaller, there's enough table left to become tamei. Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be a little bit bigger, makom hanachat chatichot, big enough for it to have a plate. But what you see from this Mishnah is that it's only because you left some space where you didn't cover it with the shayish, with the marble. Shi'er in, it's because you left some space, lo shi'er lo. But if you don't leave space, it doesn't become tamei. So what you see from here is that is that basically if you have a table, that's in this case Mikabel Tuma, it's a table that you move around, but you cover it with a piece of stone. It's not Mikabel Tuma. If it completely covers it, the Tuma goes away from it. So we presume that the same thing would happen by the Shulchan. The Shulchan is wood. Wood is not Mikabel Tuma, but you covered it with gold. Gold is Mikabel Tuma, and so the Shulchan should be Mikabel Tuma because of the gold covering. The Chitem, now you might say that's very different because the covering of the metal might be permanent. Well, I'm sorry, it might be semi-permanent. You're just covering it. You're not permanent, just a layer. And the case of the Mishnah in Kalim, which said that if you cover your table with shayish, it's no longer tamei. It might be if you covered it permanently, right? You use nails or something. So kam betzipui omeid. One is where you covered it in a way that would stand, so you attached it with screws. Kam betzipui she'eno omeid. Maybe the covering in the Beit HaMikdash was just a sort of, you layered it on top. You didn't actually attach it. So therefore doesn't take away the status of the table. That's a good question, but that was not clear. Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan about the Mishnah in Kalim. When the Mishnah says that your table that was tameh or susceptible to tumah, if you cover it with shayish, it's no longer susceptible to tumah. Is that only if the covering is permanent, or even if the covering is not permanent? And that was one question. Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan. Another question Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan was b'shechipa et levaz bizav. It's talking about a case where you covered over the bas bizav is the rim of the table. Do you have to just cover the top, or you have to cover the sides as well? Oh, b'shelo chipat lebas bizav, or did you not cover them? Amar le, and Rabbi Yochanan said back to Rish Lakish, lo shnat tzipoy omed, lo shnat tzipoy shein omed. It doesn't matter if the covering is permanent or just sitting on top of it and not permanent. And lo shna chipat lebas b'zav, lo shna lo chipat lebas b'zav. It doesn't matter whether you cover the sides or not cover the sides. So Rabbi Yochanan basically explained to Rish Lakish that even a semi-permanent or not permanent cover takes away the shame of tumah from a table. And again, now going back to the shulchan, it should be the opposite. The shulchan is not tamei. The gold is tamei, but the gold covering should make the shulchan tamei. So that was what we were trying to prove yesterday. Why is the shulchan mekabel tumah? Now, says Gemara, that might be different though, because a stam table is made out of wood. It's low quality wood. You get it from IKEA. But maybe the shulchan was made out of a very heavy duty, special kind of wood. Chitema, the shulchan was made from atzei shitim, right? The special atzei shitim that they brought into the midbar they use to make the shulchan and the other kelim, that's chashivi v'lo batli. Maybe that's such chashuv wood that even if you cover it with some gold, everyone still knows that it's cedar wood or it's whatever kind of atishitim means, right? It's a high quality wood. And so it still retains the name of wood, right? And therefore the gold does not take away this shame of wood. Says Gemara, well, chanicha l'Reish Lakish. That's a good answer according to Reish Lakish, because Hustamru said, again, on the Mishnah in Kalim, lo shanu ela b'kli ak slagos. It's only true that the shayish covering, it cancels the table and takes away the tumor from the table. If it's kli ak slagos, which I don't know what that means, so I translate it in my head as IKEA wood, because haba'im midinat hayam, it comes from far away, and meaning it's low quality, right? It's not high quality wood, it's pasteboard, whatever that is, and so covering it changes its shape. Avol kli mismas, a kli that came from mismas, which is some kind of very high quality wood, chashivi, that's considered to be chashuv, lo batli, and the metal, not the metal, the stone, the shayish on top of it will not be mevatel it, shapir. So that's a great. Then everything is a good answer because the shulchan also is very chashuv. The gold on it is not canceled and it remains a kli eitz, and therefore our question yesterday was why does it become tamei? El Rabbi Yochanan, but according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Amru said, no. Even kli mismas nami batel, even this high quality wood would become batel if you put shayish on top of it. Ma'ikal meimar. So again, you're back to your original problem. What are you going to say? The shulchan should be tamei because it is covered with gold. Says where no. Even though the shulchan is covered with gold, it is very unique. Shani shulchan. The shulchan is very special. The Rachmana karya eitz. The Torah refers to the shulchan as a wooden object, even though it's wood covered with gold. Shneimer, as the pasuk says in Yecheskel, we've had many of these pasukim from Yecheskel informing us about the Beit HaMikdash. This pasuk in Mem Aleph in Yecheskel says, "HaMizbeach eitz." The mizbeach is made out of wood. Shalosh amot gova arko shtayim amot miksot avlo varko kirotav eitz. All the side was 2, the other thing 2 amot. The corners were made. The length was made out of wood. And so you see, and the angel said to me, this is the shulchan. So you see that the shulchan is called eitz, even though it's covered with gold, which tells you that the identity of the shulchan follows its wooden component. And therefore, the question is, even though it's covered with gold, it shouldn't become tamei because it's made out of wood. So therefore we had answers yesterday as to why it became tamei, but this is why we were so bothered. Now, says the Gemara, while you're darshaning Yecheskel, this is a very strange pasuk I just read because it started off by saying the mizbeach was 8 shalosh amot gova. Then it ended by saying daber elai zeh shulchan asher lifnei Hashem. Is it the mizbeach or the shulchan? Says the Gemara, where are we up to? Sorry, find it on this internet Gemara. Says the Gemara, we are I guess around 12 lines from the top. Patach b'mizbeach. The pasuk started by describing the mizbeach v'siyem b'shulchan. And it concluded by calling it a shulchan. So why did it do that? Says Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, a beautiful, beautiful limud, which I'm sure many have already heard before. Damri tervayo, those things serve very similar functions. Bizman shebeit hamikdash kayam, when the Beit HaMikdash was around, mizbeach mechaper al adam. The Torah very clearly says, You do a sin, you do something wrong, you go, you bring an altar, a sacrifice, and the Mizbeach is mechaper. But now, achshav she'en Beit HaMikdash kayam, now we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. Shulchano shel adam mechaper alav, a person's table. The Rashi explains the charity that you give, the food you give to those who are poor, those in need, that is the kapara that is equivalent to what was done on the Mizbeach. So once upon a time, we fed the Mizbeach, we fed Hashem, whatever that means. Now, the way you're mechaper is by feeding other people. It's beautiful, beautiful limud on this pasuk in Yecheskel. Okay, now we're up to 2 dots, right? Almost halfway, not quite, almost halfway down on Daf Tzadi Zayin Amud Aleph. So the Mishnah, as you recall, described, this was yesterday's Mishnah, described the Shulchan. And the Mishnah said that the Shulchan was made 2 by 1. Remember, we talked about the size. And there were 4 panels, is how they translated it in mine. Arba snifim shel zahav hayusham. They had 4 panels of gold. Remember, they would go up the 2 sides. So there were 2 rows of bread. So 2 on each side of each row of bread. And then there were the straws, or whatever we call them, that went in between the panels that the bread sat on, right? Number 3 below each one and 2 below the top one. So we'll count the numbers again. But it says in the Mishnah that there were 4 panels that went up from the side of the shulchan on which you would put the straws, or whatever you call them, that held up the bread, right? Minani Mili, how do you know this? Torah doesn't say anything about these things. Amar of Katina Amar Kra, if you look at the pasuk, when it describes the shulchan, it says the following. It says, you make your shulchan, and then it says, it's Perek Chafei in Shmot, Va'asita ka'arotav, kapotav, ksotav, umenakiotav. 4 words. Make ka'arot, kapot, ksot, ksavot, and menakiot. What do these things mean? So ka'arot, which literally sounds like the plates, right? But that means elu defusim. These are the molds. They would make these molds. Remember, we learned about this earlier in the parak, that the way you made the bread was you would put it into a mold and then put the dough in, and it would shape it. So there were ka'arot that were used to bake the lechem upon it. Kapotav literally means a cup, a spoonful. Elu bezichim. These were the bezichim that were, of course, part of the service of the lechem apanim. That was what was part of the mizbeach every Shabbos. What about the other 2 things? So kisotav elu snifim. Kisotav refers to these panels of gold that went up the side that ended up supporting the kanim. But menakiyotav, the things that are menakiyotav, one pshat Rashi has a menakiyotav is that it kept things clean, naki, right? Elu kanim, these were the rods, I call them straws, that went under the bread so that the bread wasn't touching the bread below it, and they didn't get moldy, it didn't get moist. So it kept everything fresh, or not fresh, but not moldy. Elu kanim. And then the pasuk says, Asher yusach bahem. What does yusach mean? Shemisachim behen telechem. That these things basically cover up the bread, meaning that on top of each bread, except for the top one, there were these kanim that went on top of them to keep them protected from the bread on top of it. Okay, so that's the pasuk that is a remez, that you had these side panels that had straws between them. I keep using the word kanim, rods, reeds between them that held up the bread. Motiv Rava, now says Rava, very interesting that you prove that from a pasuk, because the Breita says the following. It's not the Breita, it's the Mishnah we had yesterday. The Mishnah says, Lo sidur kanim v'lo netilatan dochotet Shabbat. That putting in the kanim, arranging these reeds, these rods, and taking them out does not do ches Shabbat. Remember, you had to go before Shabbat. You would take out the ones from last week, and then you'd put the loaves in on Shabbat. And then Motzaei Shabbat, you would come back and you lift each loaf up and put the rods underneath them. Why isn't it doches Shabbat? If do'oraita, you're supposed to have these things because it's based on a pasuk. Amai in dochot Shabbat. Why can't you do it on Shabbat? You're allowed to do everything in the Beit HaMikdash on Shabbat that has to be done. So why can't you do this on Shabbat? So that was Rava's question. Rava, then Rava said, that's no question. I don't know what I'm talking about. What I said is incorrect. It's not, because our Mishnah also said, Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva, the principle that Rabbi Akiva taught was, that just because you have to do something on Shabbat doesn't mean you can do every melacha on Shabbat. Any melacha that you can do before Shabbat, and it wouldn't change the quality or anything about the bread or the thing you're doing in the Beit HaMikdash, Eino dochet Shabbat. You're not supposed to do it on Shabbat. Do it before. Hani and nami, these don't really affect the bread. Why don't they affect the bread? Right? We'll see. Hani nami efshad lodachi Shabbat alayu. Here too, putting in the reeds and arranging the breads is not something you really need to do on Shabbat. Time of my why? The whole purpose of putting in these separation between the layers of the bread is the lo la'apesh lechem. It's that the bread does not become moldy, right? When we worry, when two pieces of bread touch each other and they're moist, they share moisture and some mold from one gets on the other and the mold spreads, and you'd like to keep them separate, right? But all that's going to happen is you're going to put the bread down at 10 a.m. on Shabbos morning, and at 8 p.m. at night, you'll come and you'll separate them. So it's only a few hours. By leaving it for 8 hours or 10 hours without these rods, it's not going to become moldy. So you don't need to do it on Shabbos. Kedetanya, as we learned in the Braita, Ketzad, what did you do? Nichnas me'erev Shabbat v'shomtan. You would come in before Shabbat and take out the rods so they weren't there on Shabbat and leave the bread just sitting on top of the bread below it. You will leave these rods on the length of the shulchan, right? You put them on the shulchan for tomorrow. Motzaei Shabbat nichnas, then, and obviously Shabbat morning you would come, you'd take out the old last week's bread, you'd burn the bezichem, you'd eat the bread. We'll talk about that, and then take the new bread and put it on the shulchan, but touching each other. B'motzei Shabbat nichnas. And Shabbat's over, you go into the Beit HaMikdash, you go into the shulchan, magbia rasha shel chala, you lift up the head of the chala, umachnis kaneh tachtea, and you put the rod underneath it. And remember, there's three with each one, and two on the top, which we'll see in a second. The chozero magbia rasha shel chala, and then you would lift the head of the other chala, umachnis kaneh tachtea, and put the kaneh under it. So you didn't do this on Shabbat. Now, continues the Gemara. Around 10 lines on the bottom. First one on our line. Arba'a chalot, right? 4 of the chalot. Remember, there were 6 chalot on each side. Okay? So one is on the bottom of the shulchan. There's nothing under it. The top one was the next 4. So underneath number 2, 3, 4, and 5. Each of those 4 chalot needs 3 kanim. Shtrichot shlosha kanim. Each of those needs 3 rods to hold them up. Remember, the lechem apanim was, let's just say, 12 to 18 inches long, some sheer, and so each you would have 3 rods to hold it up. El Yonah, now the top one, so beneath number 6, right? So this is beneath number 2, 3, 4, and 5. Beneath number 6, Eino tzricha el shnayim. You only needed actually 2 rods because that one is nothing's on top of it, so it doesn't sit down with a lot of weight. Lefishein elem masui. There's nothing on top of it, so it only needs 2 to stay up. Hatachtona, now number 1, Eino tzricha kol ikar. You don't put any rods under it. Lefishe munachat al taharo shel shulchan. It's sitting on the surface of the shulchan. So basically, you would have nothing under the first one, 3 rods under the next 4, and 2 rods under the next one. So that's 14 rods for each side. Okay, and 28 times is 14 times 2. Now it's not hata. Now we get to the very exciting and complicated for some people, simple for other people, but a little bit detailed measurements of the Beit HaMikdash. So keep your ruler in hand, write some of this stuff down if it helps you. And we're about to do some very interesting and fun measurements. So what are we basing on? It says the Mishnah now. It's called Mishnah we quoted. It's not a ton. We have the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that kol amot shebemikdash, I lost my place. Every time the Mishnah, we say in the Beit HaMikdash, you have an amma, 2 amot, 5 amot. It's always amma beinenot. It's an in-between amma. We're going to see what that is, but that's an amma of 6 tfachim, right? So a tefach is a fist. There are some amot that are 5 tfachim. There's some amot that are 6 tfachim. We're going to see there's some that are even bigger than 6 tfachim. But says Rabbi Meir, every time the Torah says do an amma by the shulchan, by this, by that, it's a 6 tefach amma. Chutz mizbeach hazahav. There are 4 exceptions. The mizbeach hazahav, which was an amma by an amma, which was an amma by an amma, was only 5 tfachim. We'll see. We'll see why. It was an amma that was only 5 tfachim. So it was a little smaller, 20% smaller. HaKeren. Now remember that the mizbeach was 10 amot tall. Don't forget that. The first amma of the mizbeach is called the keren. So we think now, we're not sure yet, the keren was up in amma and in an amma. Okay? And so the question is whether it's the amma going up or the amma going in. We'll discuss that. But something about the Keren was not a 6 tefach amma, it was only a 5 tefach amma. The Sovev, remember the way the Mizbeach worked was that the first layer was called the Keren. You then went in one, it was 32 by 32 amot, just for record. It went in one on each side, so it was now 30 by 30, and went up 5 more amot to something called the Sovev, where the Kohen would walk around. So those 5 amot are now in small amot. They're amot of only 5 tefach. We'll see what that means. Then it would go up another 3 amot to the top of the Mizbeach, which is 9 from the floor. And then the corners, right? The corner was the 10th amma. So the 4 things that, according to Rabbi Meir, are small amma are the Mizbeach HaZahav, the Keren, which is the corner of the Mizbeach. I think I read this backwards. The Sovev, which is the midpoint of the, not the midpoint, but the rim around the Mizbeach, and the Yisod, the base. That is Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, I disagree completely. Every amma is small. Everything in the Beit HaMikdash was an amma of 5. The only things in the Beit HaMikdash that were an amma of 6, amat binyan, things of building, like when it says the Azara was 100 amot wide or 135. Those are amot that are 6 tvachim. And Rashi adds the amma of the Mizbeach chutz, the Mizbeach ha'olah, was also 6 tvachim. So all those measurements I just gave you, 32 by 32 or 10 amot tall, that's an amma of 6 tvachim. But the kelim, so the shulchan, for example, was an amma of chamisha, was an amma of 5. And so this is a Mishnah in Kelim, complicated Mishnah. Says Rabbi Yochanan, the source of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is the same pasuk. Shneim mikra echad darsha. They both darshan the same enigmatic, confusing pasuk in Yecheskel, a little later than the pasuk we just had before. This pasuk in Yecheskel Mem Gimel says the following: Elo midot hamizbeach ba'amot. This is the measurements of the mizbeach in amot. An amma is an amma v'tofach. An amma is an amma and another tefach. So, which implies that the amma is 5 tvachim, and the amma of the mizbeach is 5 plus 1, which is 6 tvachim. Turn the page to Tzadi Zayin Amud Bet. Continue, and while we're reading the pasuk, and then chek amma. Chek literally means the bottom, which again we'll see what that refers to. Is an amma. The amma rochav, and there's an amma of width. Ugvula, and the border al svata around the edge. Saviv zeret ha'achad. That's 1 zeret. V'zeh gav ha'mizbeach. A zeret is half an amma. So if you take the middle of an amma, each side is a zeret. If you go to the middle of a square, not a square, middle of a circle, but a square, each side is a zeret. So an amma is 2 zerets. So that's the top of the mizbeach. Now this pasuk doesn't make any sense. So how do we darshan the pasuk? Says the Gemara, cheka amma. The bottom is an amma. That's referring to the yisod. That the base of the mizbeach is this small amma. Remember, the pasuk basically said that the amma of the mizbeach was an amma and a tefach, amma v'tofach. So it means that the amma is a small amma, and that when you add a tefach, you make it a medium-sized amma. But the chek amma, the base, was a small amma. Zeh yisod. Amma rochav, the area around it was an amma, which is the sovev. So the sovev, the area around the mizbeach, 6 amot up, is a small amma. Ukvula svata saviv zeret echad, and the border is a zeret. Ela kranot. That's referring to the corners of the mizbeach, that those are also a small amma. And the 4th thing in the pasuk is zeh gav hamizbeach. This is the top of the mizbeach. That's referring to zeh mizbeach hazahav. That's the mizbeach hazahav, that it also uses a small amma. Rabbi Meir says, okay, so this pasuk tells me that there are 4 things in the Beit HaMikdash that use a small amma. The Yisod, the Sovev, the Keren, and the Mizbeach HaZahav. Zehu ba'amma bat chamisha. These are the only things that use a 5 tefach amma. Hakol amot kelim ba'amma bat shesh. Everything else in the Beit HaMikdash, including the menorah and the shulchan and all the other measurements, were 6 tefachim amma. Rabbi Yehuda says, I disagree. Kizeh yehu kol amot kelim. That this is a model. The Yecheskel is telling you all amot kelim are like this. Just like the Mizbeach HaZahav is a small amma, the shulchan is a small amma. Okay? Now, we, of course, saw the relevance to our Mishnah is that this determines whether the shulchan, which was 2 amot by 1 amma, was 10 tvachim by 5 tvachim, which are small amot, or 12 tvachim by 6 tvachim in the medium amot, right? And of course, that matters for the bread and how big the bread was. And so, anyways, that's where our Mishnah discussed this. But for the rest of today's daf, we're going to do a little building, okay? And says the Gemara today, what are we up to? This is very detailed. Kasal Kedaitach, okay, which is around 8 lines from the top. Now we think right now, Kasal Kedaitach, that when we say that the Yesod and the Sovev were small amot, what we mean is the height of the Yesod and the Sovev. So again, the Mizbeach was 10 amot tall. 1 amot was the Yesod, 5 amot to the Sovev, 3 amot to the corner, to the top, and 1 amot to the corner. Okay, that's 10. We think that when it says the amma of the Yesod and the amma of the Sovev were small amot, it means the height. So basically, the Mizbeach was 10 amot tall, but 4 of those amot were regular amot of 6 tvachim, and the 6 bottom amot were small amot of 3 tvachim. Of 5 tvachim. Okay, so let's read this now. So we think now, what it means is that it was 5 tfachim high for each amma. And so when the pasuk says, "My chek amma v'ama rochav," the pasuk means is, "Me chek amma," from the base of the mizbeach, which is the chek, the yisod, ad rochav, up to the wide part of the mizbeach, which is the sovev, b'ama bat chamisha, use small amot. Okay, now you have to do your math. Gova mizbeach kama habi. Top of the mizbeach, how high was it? Eser amot. Everybody knows the mizbeach was 10 amot tall. Okay, now if they were all big amot, it would be 60 tfachim, but they weren't. So shit b'nei chamisha chamisha. 6 of those amot were 5 tfachim amot, the bottom 6. Va'arba b'nei shita shita, the top 4 were 6 tfachim amot. What? Do the math, right? 30 plus 24. Mizbeach kama habi. Chamishin va'arba. So from the floor to the top of the mizbeach was 54 amot, not 60. 54 amot. Now, that's really important. Why is that really important? Because as we learned throughout all of Zvachim, the middle point of Mizbeach is a super important point in terms of determining which carbonot go above and below. Remember, the Ola Ta'of goes above. The Ola Ta'behima goes below. The Chata Ta'of goes below. The Chata Ta'behima goes above. So we need to know where the middle of the Mizbeach is. So Palga the Mizbeach Kamehavi, what's the middle of 54? Esrim B'Sheva, 27. Okay, great. Now let's do the math. If you say the middle is 27, mikranot ad sovev kamahav, go from the top and go down 4 amot from the top of the mizbeach. Those are 4 big amot. That's 24 tvachim. Esrim va'arba tvachim. So if you're standing on the sovev, you're 3 tvachim above the midline, right? Because from the top, the sovev is 24 tvachim down, and the middle mizbeach is 27 tvachim. So if you're the Kohen walking around the sovev, you're 3 tvachim above the midline. You're 3 tvachim above the midpoint. However, the problem is this. It's not the Mishnah says, there was a line in the middle of Mizbeach, which was, this is the halfway point, to differentiate carbonot that went above and carbonot that went below. And this is the continuation of the question. But we learned by Olat Of, which is supposed to go on the top part of the Mizbeach. So if you're walking on the Sovev, everything facing you is the top of the Mizbeach, up till 3 tvachim below you. However, the Braita says the following, by Olat Of, Haya'ola b'kevesh, you go up on the ramp, Panal Sovev, you go to the right, you go to the ramp, right, the Sovev, not the ramp, the middle part, Balo the Karen Dromit Mizrachit, you come to the wall of the corner on the right, then you come in, Moleket Oshomi Mularpa, you take off the head of the bird, Umavdil, and you separate it, and you sprinkle the blood. You don't sprinkle, you swipe the blood, you squeeze the blood on the wall of the Mizbeach. But the next words don't make any sense, because the next words in the Braita are, Vim asa lematami raglav. Let's say the Mizbeach is full. I don't know, for whatever reason, you don't want to do it in front of you. You reach down and you put it on the Mizbeach below your feet, right? Afilo amma achat kshera. Even up to 1 amma would be kosher. But that can't be. Because we just said that the whole Mizbeach was 54 tvachim, and halfway is 27, and the Sovev is 24 from the top. So from the Sovev, you only have 3 tvachim to go down, not 5 or 6 tvachim, which is an amma. So how can the Braita say that even 1 amma is kosher? You're putting the blood that's supposed to go on top of the Olata Of below the Mizbeach by more than 2 tvachim, below the midpoint. Ella, it can't mean that. Take it all back. When the pasuk in Yecheskel says, where are we up to? 4 lines from the wide lines, right? When the pasuk in Yecheskel said that the Sovev and the what's it called, the Yesod were 5 tvachim amot, it didn't mean the height. It meant the indentation, right? Because remember, the Yesod was a platform. The Mizbeach sat on it, but it was 1 amma in. You went up to the Sovev, you went 1 more amma in. So the in Amma is only 5 tefachim. So let's read that inside. Elchei ka'ama knisa. It's the entry, meaning the going in, the indentation above the yesod was only 5 tefachim. And Amma rochav was knisa. That's going in at the sovev. Kvulas v'tasaviv is also knisa. So says Gemara, okay, we're going to get to that math in a second, right? Meaning, do the math. If the Mizbeach was 32 by 32, and then you go in by 5 tefachim on each side, and then you go in 5 tefachim again, how much is left? And we're going to discuss that. But before we do that, let's talk about the height. Because Mizbeach Kamei Havile, now according to this pshat, every amma of height of the Mizbeach was made out of 6 tefachim. So if the Mizbeach was 10 amot, it's shitin, it's 60 tefachim tall. So now, Palgin Mizbeach Kamahavi, what's the middle of 60? Tlatin is 30. So the middle of Mizbeach is 30, right? Remember, the Sovev is 6 amot tall. We're going to go down from the top. Mikronot ad Sovev Kamahavi. If you're standing on the top and you go down to the Sovev 4 amot, how many tfachim is that? Esrim Barbas, 24 tfachim. So 24, you're ahead of 30, right? 30 is midway. Kama batzu the Palgin Mizbeach. How much is left till you get to the halfway of the Mizbeach? Shisha. 6 tvachim left. And therefore it's beautiful. Because Snan, the Mishnah said, in the Braita, Im asa'a lemata miraglav afilo amma achat kshera. If you lean down 1 amma, you're kosher because you're standing 1 amma above the midline. And if you reach down 1 amma, you can still do the karban. That's above the half. So everything's perfect. Okay, so that the height of the Mizbeach makes a lot of sense if it's 60 tfachim and we're using the regular ammot. But the problem is, the Mayokinte, how did you explain where am I? The Mayo Kimte, how did you explain this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines from the wide lines, 8th wide line. But Mayo Kimte, how did you now explain the pasuk in Yecheskel that's referring to the Knisa? It's referring to the I don't know how you translate Knisa in English, but the going in, the inset of the Mizbeach from the Yesod and from the Sovev, each one is only 5 tfachim, okay? And then the Karen also, but we'll get to the Karen in a second. It says, but does that math work? Hatnan, we have a Mishnah in Midot, everyone loves this Mishnah, which says the following. Mizbeach hayash 32 The Mizbeach was 32 amot by 32 amot. Pretty big, like 55 feet by 55 feet. Now, Allah Amma, the height, that was the base, right? It went up 1 amma tall, which we've established was 6 tfachim, and then kanas amma. It went in by 1 amma. Zel yesod, that layer is called the yesod. Nimsa, what's left now? Remember, you took 1 amma on each side, on the north and the west, and the south and the east. Shloshim al shloshim. So your next layer of the Mizbeach is 30 by 30 amot. Okay? Says, well, but it's not really 30 by 30, because if each indentation is only 5 tfachim, so remember, an amma is 6 tfachim. So you basically have shloshim shnei tfachim avi. You have 30 and 2 tfachim by 30 and 2 tfachim. Okay, maybe you'll say the Mishnah is not so exact. Let's keep reading the Mishnah. But 2, keep going in the Mishnah in Midot. Allah Chamesh, now the Mishnah says, the Mizbeach now goes up 5 more amot tall, again, 7 or 8 feet. The kanas amma, and then you go in another amma, which is what we call the sovev, zeo sovev. Nimsa, what you now have is esrim u'shmona al esrim u'shmona, 28 by 28. But again, it's not true. Because if you only went in 5 tefachim on each side, you have 1 extra tefach. So instead of being 28 by 28, it's 28 and 4 tefachim, right? 2 tefachim from the first layer and 2 tefachim from the second layer. So it's 28 by 0.67 by 28.67. Okay, so you might say, so what? 28 and change. Chitema. It's not a whole full amma. Lo chashavlei makom kranot, right? Lo chashavlei, sorry, is what I would say. Period. You shouldn't. It doesn't matter. But then go to the corners now, right? Now you go up another 3 tfachim, right? And you go up to the top of this Mizbeach, and then you have a corner. And each corner is a square of 1 by 1 amma, right? Amma mizeh, amma mizeh. Says the Mishnah, now we're back to the Mishnah Midot, Nimsa, from 28 by 28, you go in 1 amma, and it's 26 by 26. Nimsa, the top of the Mizbeach, was Esrim V'Sheish al Esrim V'Sheish. The problem is that if every time you went in 1 amma, you only went in 5 tfachim, you have 2 extra tfachim on every layer. 2 at the lowest layer, 2 at the next layer, 2 at the next layer, and instead of being 26 by 26, it's Esrim V'Sheva Havi. It's actually 27. You have a whole amma that you saved. Says Gemara, well, lo duck. Well, we're not being exact. 27, 26 is not so different. Says we're okay. What are the next words in the Mishnah? The next words in the Mishnah are Makom hiluch raglei kohanim. Now, where the Kohen would walk on the top of the Mizbeach was Amma Mizeh Amma Mizeh. They had like a border around the Mizbeach where you didn't put any coals, you don't put anything burning because you can't step on coals, and you have to have a walkway. So it's one Amma by one Amma. Says the Mishnah. Remember, we're up to 20. 6 by 26. If you go in one amma on each side, nimsa esrim varba makoma maracha. The place where you actually burned the meat was 24 by 24. But the problem is it wasn't 24 by 24 because esrim mechamishavi. We have an extra amma because we saved 2 tfachim on every layer. So why don't you say it's 25 by 25? Now says, well, you just told me it didn't matter. You have one mistake. It's fine. If you give the same answer, that we're not being exact, but the problem is that you have to be exact because we learned in the pasuk in Yecheskel, it says Ha'ariel. Now we understand Ariel to mean the burning part of the mizbeach, the fire, was shteim esrei orach b'shteim esrei rochav ravua. It was 12 by 12 in a square. Now 12 by 12 in a square means 24 by 24. Right? Well, I'll read that in the pasuk. You might think it's really 12 by 12. Because when the pasuk says on its 4 sides, it was 12 by 12 on each of the 4 sides, which is 24 by 24. Okay. So now the pasuk says 24 by 24. And you're telling me that it's really 25 by 25. So that seems a big problem. Says, well, I've got another solution for you. When we said that the Mizbeach was 32 by 32, we didn't mean, and then it kept going up and up and up and you're losing it, maybe 32 by 32 was 32 by 32 in small amot. So they're 32 by 32 in 5 tfachim amot. And so when you go to 30 by 30, it's only 5 tfachim on each side, 28 by 28, 26 by 26, 24 by 24. So maybe the Mizbeach itself was only measured in small amot. So when we say the Mizbeach was 32 amot, it really wasn't 32 amot. It was 32 of 5 tvachim amot, but really it was, 31 or 30 and a half. When you might say, that the initial Mizbeach, 6 of those amot were only made in amot of 5 tvachim, meaning the Mizbeach itself, 6 of the amot were 5 tvachim amot, so there were 6 tvachim less in the Mizbeach. So when you say 32 by 32, you really mean 31 by 31. In Cain, if that's the case, Rafchulu Azara, the problem is that you have extra space in the Azara because we have a very specific description, again in Midot, of the Amot of the Azara, and everybody agrees that the Azara was made in Amot, Beniniot, of 6 Tvachim. And Tnan, the Mishnah says in the beginning of the 5th paragraph of Midot, Kol Hazara Haita Orech 187, Arochav 135. The Azara was 187 amot by 135. Right, the length, Mimizrach the Marav, was 187, and the width was 135. How do you account for 187? So Makom Drisat Raglei Yisrael, when you come from the doors of the Ezrat Nashim, the first section is called Drisat Raglei Yisrael, and it's 11 amot, 11 amma. Makom Drisat Raglei Kohanim, the next 11 amot, 11 amma, is where the Kohanim walk. It's 22 amot. The Mizbeach was 32, Shloshim Mishtayim. And again, this is our problem, because according to what you're saying now, the Mizbeach was really only 31. But let's read the Mishnah. The Mizbeach was Shloshim Mishtayim. Bein Ulam v'la Mizbeach Esrim Mishtayim Amma. Between the Ulam and the Mizbeach was another 22 Amot. The Heichal was 100, Mea Amma. And then there was 11 more Amot, Achorai Beit HaKapor, behind the Beit Kodesh HaKadoshim. So if you add that up, it's 187. Problem is, that if your Mizbeach was only 31 by 31, then you have one extra Amma in the Beit HaMikdash. And all these measurements don't add up. Ella, says the Gemara at the bottom of Daf Tzadi Zayin Amud Bet. Let's start all over. A new pshat. Cheka Amma, when it says that the height of it's not the height. When it says the base of the Mizbeach was a small Amma, it means 5 tfachim tall, begova. I remember the problem with this, right, was that as you went up and up, you moved away from the midline, but we're going to see in a second. Chek Amma means the Gova. Amma Rochav means Knisa. So up was 5 Tvachim. The next one, the Sovev, was indented 5 Tvachim. Gvula Sfata Saviv, Lo Shnachi, Lo Shnachi. When it says Gvula, meaning the corner, it doesn't matter. It could be either um, the width basically, or the height of the corner is in 5 tvachim. But basically, what you just did for yourself was you avoided having every measurement be 5 tvachim, right? The problem with the height being 5 tvachim is that the midline wasn't in the right place. The problem with going in 5 tvachim is that you would have one extra amma on the mizbeach or in the azara. Here, we basically split the difference. And so let's do the math. It says we're at the top of daf tzadichet. Mizbeach kamahavi. So now that you've told me that when you go up in the yesod, it's only 5 tvachim, and when you go up in the corner, it's only 5 tvachim, the mizbeach turns out to be 59, 58, right? Just short of 60. Chamishim utimnaya, 58 tfachim, because you lose one in the yesod and you lose one in the keren. Palge de mizbeach kamahavi, so midline is now going to be 29, esrim matesha, right? Half of 58. Now, mikronot ad sovev kamahavi, from the corners to the middle, is going to be 24 minus 1, esrim mutlata, 23 tfachim, right? How much is 23 from the middle? The middle is 29. So kama batzur lepagi the mizbeach. How far are you now from the middle? Exactly shita. You're exactly 6 tfachim away from the middle, and that supports the Mishnah. It's not, as our Mishnah said, that we quoted many times today, im asa lemata miraglav afilo amma achat kshera. If you reach down even one amma and you do your mizbeach, your carbon olata oaf, you're kosher, because you are 6 tfachim from the middle, and you can reach down up to that amma. And says the word dekanami. In fact, this makes a lot of sense. Tichtiv heika amma ve'amma rochav shmamina uses different descriptions. By the amma of the yesod, which we're saying is a short amma of height, and the amma of the sovev, which is a short amma of width. And therefore, the pasuk uses different words because they're different types of heights and width. Shmamina, that in fact is the proof of what Yecheskel really means. And we will stop here. And I hope very much to pick it up tomorrow in person at 7:45 a.m. Eastern Time or 4:45 a.m. if you are on the West Coast from the top of Daf Tzadichet Amud Aleph. Shavua Tov.